dedicated to each and every one of you who appreciate a great glass of wine. You know what I mean?
It's Monday. Let's raise a glass to the beginning of another week. It's time to unscrew, uncork, or saber a bottle. And let's begin exploring the wine glass. Today, I am sitting down with Zeke Neely, winemaker for Kunde Family Winery in Sonoma. The winery is family-run and has been growing grapes for 5 generations. And not just any grapes, but vines that are cuttings from Chateaux, Margaux, and Lafite Rothschild. When enjoying Kunde wines, you are drinking history. So if you are enjoying exploring the wine glass, I'd appreciate you giving me some love by taking 2 minutes out of your day to write a review on whatever app you listen to. It's the best way to support the show. And if you'd like to keep up on news, please sign up for the newsletter at exploringthewineglass.com. Slancha.
I want a nice glass right now.
Hey everybody, I'm Lori Budd, a UC Davis winemaking program, someday service, champagne specialist, and WSET Level 2 graduate. You can find Exploring the Wine Glass on all the socials, as well as your favorite podcast catchers. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to swipe, subscribe, rate, and review. I promise I'll never tell you what to drink, but I'll always share what's in my glass.
Wine, give me the wine, every time. Give me the red wine, give me the blue.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Allure of the Poor, sponsored by Dracaena Wines. I am your host, Lori, and today we are traveling to the Sonoma Valley to talk to Zeke Neely of Kunde Winery. So hello, Zeke, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, Lori.
Awesome. Well, first off, complete non-wine. I love the name.
Oh,
I just
good.
absolutely love the name. I like, is it short for Ezekiel?
It is, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
But my dad was a real fan of old Westerns, and there's always an old Western an old coot with a shotgun on a porch, and his name was Zeke. So
yeah, absolutely. My dad, I was raised on John Wayne movies.
Yep.
And there were quite a few Zekes in there also. So.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, we are here to not talk about Westerns, but to talk about wine. And so let's talk about your history to start off with. So how did you find your way to wine?
Well, my family wasn't really into wine that much. I mean, I call my parents like unrepentant box wine drinkers. So it wasn't really part of my everyday upbringing, really. But so I went to UC Davis as an undergrad, and I knew there were winemaking students at the time, but one of the students I knew, his last name was Gallo. So I always thought that your parents had to own a winery in order to be in that major. I didn't realize it was an actual industry. And so, of course, I mean, you're 19 years old. What do you know? So
Right.
I ended up getting a degree in biochemistry and then working in the biotech industry of South San Francisco for about 6 or 7 years. But then I found that every vacation ended up in wine country. And you talk to a couple winemakers and you realize that winemaking is a combination of food science and being a chef. And so that really appealed to me. Like I love cooking as well. So when I'm back to school, got my master's at UC Davis in viticulture and enology, and then bounced around a bit before ending up at Kunde.
And so viticulture and enology, that's one of the things that Davis, I actually really like about the program, because it teaches you the outside and the inside, where a lot of places, they teach you, all right, well, you're going to be in the vines or you're going to be in the winery. Do you have a preference of where you prefer to be?
Well, I mean, if you end up as a winemaker or a head winemaker at a medium-sized or small winery, you end up doing both. It just depends on the time of year. And so to me, I find that really enjoyable, like being outdoors and during a certain time of year, and then running a crew in a winery at this, at other times of year. So I think that's kind of makes it a diverse, like people ask you like, well, what do you do as a winemaker? Like, well, give me a month. And tell me which month you're talking about.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. And so right now, I'm sure there's a lot of preparation going on.
Yep. Yeah. And so also specifically this time in history, with the inability to get bottling supplies,
Oh.
like shipping problems and logistical chains, and and strikes at the ports, we're finally getting some of the glass for bottling last year's wines or previous year's wines. And so there's like a flurry of activity to get stuff that was in tank into bottles and onto shelves at the same time as we're trying to clean all the equipment and the tanks and check the vineyards and make sure that everything's not getting away from you. So it's pretty hectic right now.
Yeah, it's sad. I heard a story of one winery, a small winery, who had purchased their glass or whatever, and then it came to port and it got held up,
Yep.
or it was held out before port, but it was shipped, right? So it was on the boat, and then it got held up, and then they got a notification that, okay, it's no longer held up, but now this is the price of the glass.
Yeah.
And they like increased it significantly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're like, but wait a second, that glass was already ours, but no, somebody else will buy it, I
No.
guess, because there's just so much, need out there.
Supply and demand. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And that is true. That's the thing a lot of people don't understand about inside that winery is it's like a chess game of
Mm.
keeping track of what is in tank or in barrel, and then, rotating that to the next process, which would be bottling, and then aligning all of that up. And now does Kunde have their own bottling line, or
We do.
is it a
Yep.
mobile? Okay, so
Yeah.
that makes it a little bit easier, because you don't have to then schedule that mobile truck to come on in and everything. And then
Yep.
at the same time, as you said, now, all right, I finally got this out the door, and now new stuff is coming in.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't exactly just go in easily, right? You've got to clean.
Yeah. No kidding.
So let's talk about Kunde itself. The winery has quite a bit of history. It's actually like over a century old, right? So can you tell us
Exactly.
about the history?
Yeah. Yeah. So the property was purchased back in early 1900s, so 1904, and making one of the oldest wineries in Sonoma County, let alone California as well. And it's got like a really low bond number. So a bond number of it's like when the winery is established. So it's 202. So it's like the 200th winery in existence in the United States.
Wow.
So that's kind of cool, right? But so it's been in the family ever since. So they've owned the property. They went back and forth between. They always had grapevines, but having grapevines and cattle like for a long time, and Sonoma Valley was more well known for beef and cattle raising. Napa Valley too. I mean, they had the tanning right on the Napa River, which kind of polluted it for a while. But they're still getting over that.
Oops.
Yeah, but so it's like very ag oriented area of California, Sonoma Valley, and so these days it's still in the family. Family is in management, the Kunde family, and we have several vines, little plots where the vines are over 100 years old because they're the originals. So that's kind of cool to work with.
And not only cool, but they're cuttings from Chateaux, Margaux, Lafite, Rothschild,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's some pretty incredible history there. And so maybe you can explain a little bit. I know that you're relatively new there, but the whole concept of it is no matter where you go. So these vines that have come from Chateaux Margaux and Lafite Rothschild, you can keep them going by kind of, taking clippings, and that's actually how they got here. So can you explain like what a clipping is and how you can keep that vineyard site going this many years?
Sure. So these little, so what you end up doing, so during the winter time, the vines go dormant. And so they just kind of shut down and they're perfectly fine. And what we do with these clippings is we graft them onto an existing rootstock. And so you have basically what looks like a bundle of sticks, but it's still like a living grapevine. And so you can take a grapevine from a famous vineyard, or just like a clipping from there, and then graft it onto a rootstock in California, and then grow basically a clone of what that grapevine was at Lafite Rothschild, And so from that, you can end up having sort of a propagation of history. So you have these famous vineyards that who knows how old that vine was or how many times it's been repropagated from the original grapevine that could have been from Roman times. Like you don't really know. And so some of these vines have a lot of history within California. And so some of them have completely lost their origins. So we've given them new names. So there's Wente family in Livermore.
Right.
Yeah. And they were kind of like a repository of some of these old vines. And so we just call it Old Wente clone, like some of these Chardonnays and Cabernets that you get, or Zinfandels. But really, who knows where it came from originally? Like the Wentes didn't originate it. Like it came somewhere in Europe, So you just you can continue to propagate these things. And then once you've got a grapevine growing that came from that original grapevine, you can take clippings off that one and make clones of it in the vineyard. So the whole vineyard block can be from that one vine that was in France at, in the 1800s.
As long as you have patience.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it'll take a while.
It'll take a while. And I always think that is a really cool concept, that you can have, a vine that was somewhere else in this, this amazing vineyard site and bring it over, and it's the same vine. It's the same thing. You just,
it's so cool.
incredible.
There's a winemaker in Napa that was visiting England and like an old Roman ruins, and there was a grapevine growing against a wall that was gnarly and huge, and he's like, that's Chardonnay, and he got permission, and they were able to date it to Roman times.
Wow.
This grapevine is still alive, but it didn't really have any fruit on it anymore. But he was able to petition the government to get a clipping, like a pruning, from it, and he propagated a vineyard here in Napa with this Roman Chardonnay. And so he makes like a barrel, like from this. But to me, that's super cool, right? Like it's just a tie to these ancient like histories that we have.
That is pretty cool. I would love to taste that wine, just to say that, you know exactly where that came from. And that would be cool. We're going to have to do a little more research on that one and find out where it is. But that is cool. And, like in Paso, Topless Creek has done amazing things with it, bringing back the vines and propagating them and having farms so that, pretty much every vineyard has a Topless Creek a vine.
That's another one for sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's also kind of interesting too, though. Sometimes there's mistakes because when you bring these clippings back, it's just a stick, and you can't tell from that stick. Like if it gets mixed up, like you don't know what it is, So.
Right. Unless you have a true amphilographer there who knows really, really what he's doing.
Well,
and then that's
exactly.
Years down the road anyway, before it starts fruiting and you know exactly what it is.
Totally.
I thought you were going to bring up a very specific oops of Paso.
Well, that was the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
we talk about it all the time. It happens,
For sure. Yeah.
Oops, and it can turn out great. It can lead to a whole other path. So again, you had mentioned that it is completely family run. They're in their like 4th generation now, but there's youngins coming up.
There is, the 5th generation. Yeah. So it's kind of a legacy. Well, it is a legacy, really.
And does this 5th generation, are they aiming towards that, or is it?
Yeah, some of them branch out, and like I worked with one of the Kunde kids at a different winery I was in Sonoma Valley that I was working at. So some of them like are passionate about the wine industry, but don't necessarily want to be stuck in the family business,
Right.
But one of the 5th generation is running the tasting room at this time.
Okay.
So it's just, we find little areas of expertise.
And I think it's always good that, or I think it's common that these legacy families of the wineries, the children do branch out, but it's kind of interesting. They usually always come right back home, and realize that, maybe the grass isn't greener over there. This is pretty
how good they had
over
it.
here.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So let's talk about what Kunde is known for. What do you guys grow? What type of grapes do you have?
Well, on the estate vineyard here, we've got quite a bit of Zinfandel, Chardonnay, and Cabernet Sauvignon are the main things that the winery is known for. Sauvignon Blanc as well. So one of the major players in that area. We've branched out a little bit. We're making some Russian River Pinot from fruit we buy from an outside grower. But for the most part, that's where people come to see the wines. Like they're interested in and then Sonoma Valley is sort of known for Zinfandel. Like if you think about it.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think about Zinfandel? Because it really is. But what do you think about Sonoma Valley that is Zinfandel? What is the climate like? What is the geographical features that make it ideal for Zinfandel?
So Zinfandel is sort of a light-skinned grape or a thin-skinned grape, and so it's prone to disease pressure. So I don't know if you've had your table grapes and you left them out too long and they start to get a little mildew on them or something like that, and Zinfandel will do that pretty quickly. So, but it also doesn't like too much direct sunlight. It can also burn and sunburn and reduce the quality of it. So really, you want some place that gets warm enough. That has enough sunlight that it'll ripen, but at the same time, it's not too hot. But you also want this airflow and lack of moisture, so it doesn't really get any of the disease issues. So that's the technical end of it. But really, having a vineyard where the vines struggle a little bit, and so what that does is reduce the number of leaves and shadowing that it has over the fruit, and allows a little bit more what we want to call dappled sunlight. And so dappled sunlight on the fruit is ideal for those berries, those individual berries on a cluster to develop flavor and color. So that's kind of what you're looking for. And so Sonoma Valley itself is sort of ideal for just that sort of profile. It's a little bit too warm for things like Pinot Noir, which is more of a cool climate grape. And it's pretty ideal for Zinfandel.
And so you're having the ocean influence come in? Is that?
Yeah, it's more San Pablo Bay. So we have San Pablo Bay, a little cooling influence. We also have an ocean influence because directly west of Sonoma Valley, there's a couple gaps in the coastal range where an ocean breeze can come through. So it'll cool down from the south, which is San Pablo Bay, that bay influence, as well as from the ocean breeze from the west.
Okay. And so that's kind of interesting because Zinfandel, all I think about Zinfandel is back to Prohibition times where they were like shipping them in the bricks and stuff. So in my breed, I had it as a thicker skinned because it lasted so long being shipped. But what about the grape makes it be able to ship like that?
Well, I think a lot of those grapes that were shipped back east during Prohibition were a combination of Zinfandel and Alicante Bouschet, which is it's called a Teinturier, where so red wine grapes just have red skins and the flesh inside the berry is clear. Teinturier grapes are red on the inside flesh as well. And so that made just this really dark sort of wine where you could make the wine out of those grapes, press the skins, just add more sugar and water and make a second batch, like out of those grapes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Zinfandel's a little lighter, but it does well with a lot of these Italian varieties, like as a blender.
And does Kunde use Zinfandel as a blend? Do you have blends?
There's a couple blends, yeah, that will use Zinfandel as well. And sometimes if you get a certain vineyard block, sometimes those blocks were planted with different occasional grapevines in there. So these field blends that you harvest all at once will occasionally have some of these darker grapes just mixed in, and you could, like, only if you're out there individually picking them differently would you keep them separate. So that's kind of fun too. So
you make individual blocks. So the wine that I have here is the Heritage block.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm assuming that since this is an actual called out to the block, that these vines, the berries are held separate and processed independently. So how do you, what is your general philosophy on production of red wines, Zinfandel, in terms of oak? Do you like any stainless? How do you go about processing?
Sure. So specifically for a wine like that, heritage blocks we can only get those grapes from that block. And so that has to be kept completely separate from the other Zinfandel wines that we make. And so basically you have different tiers of what you're looking at. So for a larger blend that might end up being sold retail at a grocery store, you can mix and match, based on what you're looking at. But really what you want to do, if you can, is keep everything separate, every block separate, ferment it separate, and barrel it down separate, so that you can take a look at what each vineyard did quality-wise every given year. So it just informs you about which farmers performed well, which ones didn't, which blocks performed well within a farm, and it helps you make decisions for the future. So for this heritage Zin, this is kind of a cool project because we're talking about having these cuttings from different old vines. And there's a project spearheaded by ZAP, Zinfandel Advocates and Producers. And it was to make sure that we preserve some of these old vines that they know about that have been around for at least the 1930s. So it's been confirmed that these vines have been planted in these vineyards since the 1930s at least.
Wow.
And so what this heritage block has is these different clones from different areas of California that were sourced and then replanted in the block that we have at Kunde in different rows. And so we have, super like vines that are maybe 100 years old from the Dry Creek Valley of Sonoma County, from Mendocino County, from Napa, so all these different areas, and they sourced all these different vines from them. And then now they're all planted in this one vineyard. And so we can see how they perform and make a fun little, like we're talking about, a throwback to history, like a little history lesson in your wine glass.
That is pretty cool. Is this always 100% Zinfandel, or are those grapes could they be other varieties that are in that block?
No, these would be 100% Zinfandel.
100% Zinfandel.
Yeah.
So you're seeing in a single block, you're seeing how Dry Creek Valley grows there, how Sonoma Valley grows there. So are you able to harvest? Are they basically ripening at the same time? Because I'm assuming they're different clones.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that they basically ripen at the same time, and it's like for Zinfandel specifically, based on the climate and the soil, things kind of track each other, even though they're different clones. The flavors you get from those vines will be a little bit different, but the clones themselves sort of track ripeness levels.
And now I have that Kunde has vineyards that are within the valley floor that go all the way up to the Mayacamas mountain range. So you have varying degrees of altitude. So how does that affect the grapes that are being grown there?
Significantly. So whenever I visit a vineyard, I'm always thinking about how does it feel to me, like the weather right now? Because I know where I came from, like what the weather is like, and you're just kind of aware of those things. So if you visit down to, for instance, the Carneros district of Sonoma County, in the afternoon, it's super windy. Like it's just like the wind is just really powerful. But in Sonoma Valley, there's very little wind, like at that same time. It's just like a wind tunnel down in the south there. And so that'll affect the grapes because it'll cool down the vineyards. If you have that high wind, and it also makes the vineyard or the vines themselves shut down and go to sleep for a little bit. Mm-hmm. Now, in Kunde Vineyard specifically, because of the huge altitude changes, sometimes you can be above the fog line. So you have morning fog, and so at the top of the hill, you'll be getting morning sunlight, whereas the vines on the valley floor will be in the fog. And so they'll be chilled down. So oftentimes you'll have vineyards that are at the top of the hill that start to ripen a little bit quicker because they're getting more sunlight. Now that said, in the evening, it might be super windy up at the top of the hill, and it's kind of calm down in the valley floor. So the valley floor might get more heat in the evening of each day, but less sunlight in the morning of each day. And so that just leads to different ripening speeds, different flavor profiles, different disease pressures, which is something that you always have to worry about. But you just end up having like a different wine that you end up making from these different, different blocks. So altitude's pretty important. And then you also think about like at the top of the hill, it's usually pretty rocky because over the millennia, like a lot of that topsoil is washed down from all the rains. And so it's just a very stark and often rocky sort of soil up at the top of the hill, and down at the bottom of the hill, all that topsoil has washed down there. It's like a heavier profile. So that also lends a different sort of ripening and flavor profile to the eventual wines that you make.
All right. So as the water comes down, it's washing away the soil, but it's also washing away the nutrients. So then it's much more nutrient rich down on the floor than
exactly.
Up.
Yep.
But that is what makes wine making the cool part, because if you're harvesting these and you're keeping them all separate, when it comes time to make a bottle, make your final blend, even if it's 100% Zinfandel, make your final blend to take from this barrel that had a little bit more difficult time, this barrel that had a lot of sunshine, this barrel who had a little bit cooler temperature. And that's what makes the complexity of the wine versus. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you keep them separate, then you end up having very unique wines. But then sometimes you can take the components and blend them in certain ratios and make a very complex wine. So I think you're right. That's a fun part. It depends on what your goal is. Do you want to have 6 different Zinfandels that all differ based on where they came from? Or do you want to have like 2 really interesting Zinfandels, it just depends on what you're trying to create.
I think it would be a pretty cool, there are some wineries that have done it where you can match, I'm thinking of blanking on their name. They're in Sebastopol. They're a Pinot, McPhail. They have a wall of their soil types.
Oh, right.
So like tunnels of the dirt that's in the soil, in the thing. And then you can taste the wine and, part of it is to guess which soil that has come from, that type of thing.
Those are good visuals. But like we talked about, it's so much more complex than that. Like it just, like you could have those soils, but if they're all at the top of the hill, or if you switch one with the other based on the altitude, like those grapes will turn out different. Right. So yeah, the soil is super important, but it's like only one facet of how those grapes create flavor,
Right, absolutely. It's the you can nature the grapevine, but it's really or I guess you can nurture the grapevine, right. But it's truly nature that is going to make that big difference.
No kidding.
So how did you find your way to Kunde after you graduated? After you graduated with your master's? Is that what you said?
Yeah, master's degree. Yeah. So it's funny. So there's like a lot of names of jobs in the wine industry and like in production. So while I was getting my master's degree, I did an internship. So I was an intern during a harvest. And then after that, because of my science background, my first job was as a laboratory manager. And then after that, it was an enologist, which is like a level below an assistant winemaker, and then an assistant winemaker, then a winemaker, then a production winemaker, then a head winemaker, and then now a senior winemaker. So
all right, that is a lot of tiers. My goodness.
Yeah. So I always joke that senior winemakers because of my gray hair.
What is a production winemaker?
So sometimes there's like a dirty little secret in the wine industry. Sometimes there's a face of the winery brand, right? But like the face of the brand isn't always the person that's doing the winemaking. And so they need somebody to produce all the wines for the brand itself. And so that's what I was doing for that job title.
So they wanted somebody else's face. They wanted your abilities, but somebody else's face.
Exactly. It's hard to believe with this face, but
I don't know. I agree. I think you could be the face of many wineries. I
there you
do.
go. Thank you so much.
um, so Kunde is very focused also on sustainable wine growing. So
Exactly. Yeah.
why, which is wonderful to hear. And I think that it's becoming more and more, I think it used to be a buzzword. Now it's like, wait, you're not doing it. But
Right.
it's interesting when you find a winery that's been doing it long before it was even a buzzword.
Right.
So why do you think it's so important?
Well, so I mean, there's also kind of to me. So let me back up a little bit. I remember talking to a winemaker in Mendocino County, and somebody was asking like, well, is this wine? Are these grapes for this bottle of wine? Were they sustainable or organic or something like that? And he's like, yeah, they're organic, but it's not so much because the grower really felt like strongly about it. It's because he's a cheapskate. Like it's like it's like, well, what are you gonna do if you get mealybug in your vineyard? He'd ask, and the grower's like, are you gonna spray it? He's like, do you know how much that stuff costs? Like, so there's kind of a frugal aspect to sustainable or organic grape growing because both are about limiting how much spraying you're doing because you can like what's the bare minimum, and so you can approach that from a environmentalist viewpoint but also from a cheapskate viewpoint. Like really, like you don't want to pay for stuff that you're not needing, so like from that point of view, good farming means doing the bare minimum, right? The bare minimum inputs, the bare minimum number of tractor passes through a vineyard, all that kind of stuff. And so what I like about sustainable, like so certified sustainable, what I like about that is it has many levels. It's not just pesticides. It also has different levels of are you taking care of the creek beds? Like, is the water flow? Are you making sure that there's no erosion control or that there's erosion control? And also, are you paying your workers a living wage for where they live? Like, and then it also has a facet of, is your business model sustainable? Like, or you could do all these things and go bankrupt. And then so like, so you have to make sure that so you have to think about it like from the point of view is this going to continue for another 3 generations?
And now a word from our sponsor. Exploring the Wine Glass is brought to you by Dracaena Wines. Dracaena Wines is an artisan winery located in Paso Robles, California. They have been producing wine since 2013. Their first vintage began with one wine, their classic Cabernet Franc, which received a 91 in Wine Enthusiast. Since then, they have increased production as well as expanded their portfolio, have received many accolades including multiple double gold medals and consistent 90-plus ratings. Visit their website www.dracaenawines.com or use the link in the show notes to schedule a private tasting and to see their entire portfolio. Purchase your award-winning wine and let Dracaena Wines help turn your moments into great memories.
And so I think that's the part that I enjoy about the sustainable moniker.
Yeah, it's funny because you pointed that out. Organic really only cares about the vines or the fruit or the whatever you're growing, because there's organic everything out there. But sustainable really cares about the vines, the soil, the creeks that are flying by, the birds that are flying overhead, the winery itself or the building itself, the people inside of it. It encompasses so much more of just treating everything equally good.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely more encompassing, like as like a positive sort of mindset or paradigm. So I really like that whole thing. I mean, it's difficult because it's like we just spent 5 minutes trying to explain it. Like it's difficult to have like a short little phrase.
Right.
Like organic is really straightforward. Here's a list of stuff you can't use. That's what organic is, and which is fine, but it's also, it doesn't encompass the things we were just talking about.
No, and the other thing about organic is, you can't use this, but people get all up in arms, about sulfur and things like, organic versus, do you use it? Do you not use it? And I just think organic seems to be more gray area type things because yes, here's a list, but you know what? This really does fight this. So you can do this type thing.
Right. Yes. Sometimes there's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason. Yeah.
Right. Where sustainability is truly just the better of people, better of the environment, better of whatever you're growing. It's a rather straightforward.
The other cool thing about sustainable, like certified sustainable, is that every time you're recertified, you have to show, I don't know, 5 or 10 things that you're doing better than the first time you're certified.
Oh, dang.
So
that can get rough. That
you never can
rough
rest
after 100 and some odd years.
Exactly. Yeah. So you keep on having to show that you're taking efforts to improve.
Wow.
Yeah.
That can get rough.
Totally.
So let's go back. I do have a glass. It is only 11:30, but I'm just going to sip here. So this is a Heritage Block Zinfandel. And now it does say Sonoma Valley on it, but this is 2018. So this is pre-Sonoma Valley AVA. Or is it Sonoma Coast AVA is the new, what's the new AVA?
Sonoma Coast was the new one.
Sonoma Coast AVA.
Yeah,
okay, yeah. Never mind. So Sonoma Valley, I don't know if you have this in front of you at the moment, but I think that it's got the typical the aromatics of Zinfandel, and I think that Zinfandel, to me, more so than a lot of other grape varieties, gets distinctive characteristics like Dry Creek Zinfandel is Dry Creek Zinfandel. I think you get that. So how do you describe a Sonoma Valley Zinfandel to somebody? What can they expect?
So sometimes when you're looking at like a Dry Creek, so Dry Creek Valley in Sonoma County is a bit warmer. It's a bit warmer than Sonoma Valley, and so you end up with a riper profile. And it's very distinctive, like you said. Sonoma Valley ends up having a little bit more of red fruit rather than that black
cherry.
Yeah, definitely. And but it still has the same spiciness. So there's sort of like a white pepper spiciness that you get with these wines. And then sometimes when you age a Zinfandel in oak, some of that spiciness turns into baking spices like cinnamon or nutmeg. And so you get a lot of those sort of flavors to it. And then the nice thing about Sonoma Valley is because it's a little cooler, you maintain more acidity. So in Dry Creek Valley, oftentimes, as the grapes ripen, they lose some of the acid. And so when you make the wine, sometimes it could feel heavy, like it feels like a heavier wine. Not all the times, but sometimes it does. And so Sonoma Valley having a little bit more of like a diurnal swing. So it's going to cool down at night more than it will up in Dry Creek Valley. And so that helps maintain some of that acidity and also extends the growing season. So you end up getting more hang time.
So this definitely has red fruit, and it is a lighter bodied than the Dry Creek. But it's still, as you said, the acidity is bright. So it's very fresh fruit. It's very fresh red fruit in there.
Exactly.
And it is white pepper, a little maybe like cardamom. So like a little bit of that. So do you, since this was not your vintage,
right?
Do you know what the process was? How much new oak is on this?
Well, in general, yeah. So I tasted through a bunch of the wines. I would say that, so first off, when somebody's starting off with the goal of being a winemaker, some of the advice that I give them is only work for wineries whose wines you like, because you can end up, like making a decent living, but also being just kind of not very proud of your products. Yeah, exactly. Like you're like, well, I did exactly what they wanted. I made a quality wine, but it's not the kind of wine I like to drink. And so, so when I took the job at Kunde, like first thing you do is you go to the tasting room incognito and then taste through the wines like before the interview and make sure like, do I really want to shoot for this job? Like let's make sure I like the wines. And so tasting through the Zinfandels, they have a similar profile to what I like to do, which is if you do 100% new oak, it's just going to overpower it. And it's going to, it's going to taste almost like bourbon at that point. So really, what you want to do is shoot for somewhere between 25 and 40% new oak. And then oftentimes with Zinfandel, something that works really well is American oak. And so American oak barrels. And so that's basically what I've found just going through the wines in the cellar. That's sort of the profile that we're looking at.
Because there is, to me, I think you can tell that there's an oak influence to it. Not from that vanilla, not from that oakiness, but the tannin that is in there, it's softer. And I think that if you have, I think that's what the oak helps to soften a bit.
Definitely.
But it is interesting because it definitely is on that red fruit spectrum. But when somebody comes to Kunde, I hear they can bring their dog and go on a dog hike.
I haven't tested that theory, but yes, it's very dog friendly here. Yeah.
I saw online that you go on a dog hike. And then after, I think it's like 4 hours long. So my dog would not be happy at 13 years old. He would not be happy after a 4-hour hike. But so I'm assuming you're going up into the vineyards. The vineyards are they right there? Is the estate? Because one of the things that I think people are confused about is estate doesn't mean that your winery is right there. Estate means that you own it. So you can have an estate somewhere else.
Right.
But are your vineyards right there?
Yes. The tasting room and winery itself is surrounded by the vineyards. Yeah. And then some of the options they have for tasting, you have to book them in advance, but it's like they take you in a van all the way to the top of the hill, so you can taste wine up at the top of the hill. And the view is spectacular. You see all Sonoma Valley all the way down to San Francisco if the air is clear, if the fog's clear. So it's pretty. I highly recommend it if you can swing that one. But the tasting room itself is also the structure is a recreation of the original building from 1904, and so like brick for brick, so it's pretty cool.
Wow, and that's something tradition continues in Kunde. Like they move forward in advancements and understanding of technology and continuing to create wonderful wines, but there is that recognition to the past, and I think that I know that doesn't necessarily translate into the wine, but I think it in a way it does.
Well, really what you want is, if your name's on the bottle, you should take pride in it, right. And they all grew up on this property. They all went swimming in the swimming holes and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of history and a lot of pride associated with this wine label.
Mm-hmm. And going back to those tastings, if you could go up to the mountain, I think one of the coolest things to see is, you had said earlier about the grapes could be above the fog line. Mm-hmm. I think it is amazing when you are up above the fog line and then you're up there. So I can envision going up in the morning, having, dressed nice and warmly, and then watching the fog, not be able to see anything below, and then enjoying a nice glass of Kunde wine and watching the fog disperse off so that you can start to see things. That's got to be incredible.
It's spectacular. So part of my job, every once in a while I pinch myself, because you end up visiting vineyards that are so out of the way along dirt roads and through these fence lines and everything else. And you end up in this little magical area, surrounded by redwoods, or, it depends on where you're going. But it's all these little areas where, every once in a while I think to myself, a tourist would pay hundreds of bucks for this experience. And I'm getting paid to do this. But yeah,
it's a good gig.
If you're in the vineyards above the fog line and you just look down and you can see the mountaintops around you, and that's it. And below is just this blanket. It is pretty magical.
Yeah. My husband and I had biked in Colorado Springs. We biked Pikes Peak. Mm-hmm. And it was hysterical because they take you up to the mountain, because we weren't going up it, we were going down it.
Right.
So they take you up in the van up to the very top of Pikes Peak, and you're freezing. You've got like 8 layers of clothing on and all this stuff. And the van follows you down. And as you get hot, because now you're going lower and lower, so
Yep.
it gets more warm. By the end of the thing, you're in shorts and a tank top, but up on top you had like 2 pairs of sweatpants. They literally had in the van just massive boxes of clothes that you would just throw on, and then you could whip them off as you were going. But
That's it. Yeah.
right. But to be up there and to be enjoying, because I personally think Kunde makes incredible wines. I think they're distinctive. I think they're true to the terroir. And it's always a quality wine. And what's even more impressive, it's not even their prices are not out of control. Like they're
Exactly.
reasonably
Yeah.
priced wines.
I always think we charge too little, but
Don't
it's good
change
for the
that on my
consumer.
behalf. Yeah, don't change that on my behalf. You know, I kind of agree with that. When I was talking about Kunde on the television segment, I told the host the price, and I think she almost keeled over. You know,
Yep.
but you know, it's quality, and it's nice that Kunde doesn't
It,
go out of control.
that's it. Yeah, exactly.
So is there anything about Kunde or about the area, the estate that I didn't talk about that people should know about Kunde?
It's got a lot of history to it. So I think that, some of the first Cabernet vines in the United States were planted on this property. Who knows where, but like it's on this property. And so you have all these just characters that came through here, like all part of California history, that make it pretty special. I mean, there's like a lot of historical stories associated with this area. The other thing I like to tell people is that Sonoma, so I kind of personify grapes and grapevines. And so I think that like a lot of times grapes grow really well where people want to live. And so if you think about like the wine countries of the world, they're always like the most moderate yet kind of sunny areas of each country,
Right.
not too hot, not too cold, and so I think that Sonoma Valley is sort of a piece of paradise, when you like, we've got a house, so it'll reach 100 degrees every once in a while in the summertime, but it cools down at night. And so we don't have air conditioning, and we've only ever wanted it like 1 week a year, so, and then it doesn't get so cold in the winter and not so hot all the time. And so like, it's just a nice little area. So I always think that if you're planning a visit, definitely spend a little time in Sonoma Valley.
Absolutely. Windows open, enjoy it. But you're actually the very first person who has ever said that about personifying the grapes to, well, if we like the area, the grapes kind of like the area. That's you're the first person who said that, and it's so true. If
Yeah,
you
you
think
about
about
it.
those regions, yeah, absolutely. Right. And, different grape varieties, just like different people. Okay, I can deal with it a little colder. That's
Right.
not me. My husband can deal with it a little bit colder. I can't deal with it a little bit colder. Yeah. So different grape varieties, but it's still those beautiful areas that, climatically, and scientifically, it's really a very small region.
It's very narrow. Yeah, definitely.
And those longitude latitude thingamajiggies of which grapes really love to live, and kind of the same with people.
Yeah, exactly.
You are the first person, so I'll give you kudos to that.
Oh, thanks.
That is the first person who has put that, and that is absolutely so true. So where can people find Kunde?
We have national distribution. So yeah, like, and it depends on the tier brands that you're looking for. So sort of our entry level you'll find at grocery stores, like especially in California.
Okay.
But we also have a website, so you can buy online. If you can ship to your state, I never really know which states you can ship to anymore. But
changes all the time.
Exactly. We also have a wine club that's pretty active. So definitely look us up online.
And this heritage block is a higher tier, Kurt.
It is, and it's usually just direct to consumer, like tasting room or wine club.
Okay,
yeah.
But they can always just go online and check it out.
And have it shipped, exactly.
And check out the dog hikes, because I want to do that.
Maybe the shortened version.
The shortened version, yes, yes. And I'm thinking up the Mayacamas Mountain might not be the happiest for my dog at this time, but I think you deserve, if you can hike up the mountain, I think that you deserve a very nice glass of wine afterwards. So
Yes, definitely. It's steep.
yeah. Absolutely. So actually I'm going to wrap it up, and then I have this question. That steepness, how is harvesting on those? Like, it's got to be slow going on those steep.
It's definitely slow. Like some of the older blocks are terraced, so it makes it a little bit easier for foot traffic, but a lot of it's hand harvested, so makes it pretty difficult. Like I'll walk up those vineyards, you just get winded, like when you're walking up those vineyards, and so it's definitely slow going, especially all the hand harvesting. And some of them are so steep that you couldn't machine harvest it, even if you could. The thing would tip over. So. Right.
That wouldn't be good. That'd be good. Whenever I go away somewhere, the hotel, I always use the stairs. I try not to use the elevator. Mm-hmm. And I always say, I conquered the hotel, because like the first day of the hotel, you walk up the stairs and you're like, whatever. But if you're staying at that hotel for like a week or so, by the end of the week, you're like, yeah, I conquered this hotel. All good. So maybe, you got to get used to conquering the steepness.
That's it.
But you're probably carrying a lot of other stuff with you. I'm just carrying myself, But anyways, well, thank you so much for joining me. Kunde can be found on social media right there. Yep. Is it Kunde Wines?
Kunde.com.
Kunde.com. Yep. And everything there we'll send you to the social media so you can find them.
Exactly.
And the Zinfandel is killer. The original one that I had on the TV segment was, I guess, your entry level. Mm-hmm. Zinfandel, and that was stellar, and this is just beautiful. So I will say, I know you don't have a glass, but I always end it with raising a glass and saying sláinte, and thank you very much for joining.
Cheers.
This has been another episode of Exploring the Wine Glass. Thanks for listening. If you have suggestions on what topics you would like me to discuss, please reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as Exploring the Wine Glass. I am also on LinkedIn as Lori Hoytbud. Of course, you can always email me at exploringthewineglass@gmail.com. If you enjoyed what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe to help others find me more easily. And most importantly, tell your wine-loving friends, because if you like the podcast, they will too. Music is Wine by Kevens. Until next week, sláinte.
Coffee, banana, daiquiri, sweet Merlot, give me the nebe, your love.